Welcome everyone to this podcast entitled Beyond Drax, a real green future for Yorkshire and the Humber. My name's Phil Armstrong. I'll be asking a few questions and possibly answering a few as well, we'll see. Here with me we've got Jonathan Essex from Greenhouse, and we've got Mary Dickinson from Stop Burning Trees. Just to say who I am, Phil Armstrong. I work for Modern Monetary Theory UK, mmtuk.org, and also I'm an associate at the Gower Initiative for Modern Money Studies. We'll start off the podcast really by, I'll go over to Mary first and ask her a little bit about this report that she's been writing about about Drax and moving beyond Drax. So, and also Jonathan will pipe in as well, and hopefully we'll have a lively discussion between the two of them. I'll be here to keep order, but hopefully that won't be required. So, Mary, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. I guess just to introduce why this report came about, I work as a campaigner campaigning against Drax and for a cleaner energy system, and Drax very much embodies everything that's wrong with our current response to the climate crisis. For a quick context for everyone, Drax is the single biggest carbon emitter in the UK. It emits more than the gas power stations, three biggest ones combined. Last year, it emitted 15 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But despite this, our government doesn't actually count any of those emissions. So Drax used to be a coal power station, and then they converted to burning wood pellets or trees for energy about 10-15 years ago. And under our current carbon accounting rules, we call this carbon neutral, and we pretend it's fine, which to most people who look at that and see burning trees, they think that makes no sense. And they're right, it doesn't make any sense. Burning wood pellets for energy emits just as much, if not more, carbon than coal. But because we rely on these carbon accounting loopholes that the trees will eventually regrow, we pretend that actually that carbon doesn't matter. And if it does matter, it gets counted in the countries who the trees come from, because we've already lost much of our forest in this country. So we've chopped down most of it. None of Drax's wood, the 8 million tonnes of wood pellets that they burn every year, come from this country. They all come primarily from North America and a little bit from the Baltic states and Portugal in Europe. So then we've got this massive problem, basically, on our doorstep. We've got this huge power station that's based on this very dirty energy we're pretending is green. And so when we're raising this with our decision makers, our politicians, often what comes up is that, oh, well, we can pretend it's carbon neutral, but also they're a big employer in the region. And so for us, we looked at that and we said, yes, we need green jobs in this country. We need green jobs in Yorkshire and the Humber. We have huge potential in Yorkshire and the Humber to be powering the country and everything like that. But it can't be based on a lie. And when you base it on Drax and those jobs, it is based on a lie. And it's based on environmental damage, and it's based on harm to the communities where these wood pellets are produced. They produce huge amounts of deadly pollution that these communities are exposed to on a daily basis. And you see many of them with heart disease, asthma, COPD, young children who can't play outside because of all the wood dust in the air. So we took all of that and all of these issues with Drax and this form of energy, and we reached out to Greenhouse think tank and Jonathan to look at what jobs are actually needed in Yorkshire and the Humber.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, so myself and my colleague Peter Sims, we worked with the campaign, the Stop Burning Trees campaign. See, not to go into more detail of the problem. We know the huge severe climate impacts. We know that the fairy tale technology of climate capture and storage is not something we should be banking our future on. But what we were asked to do was really come up with an alternative story, an alternative vision for Yorkshire than backing sort of this huge white elephant of a technology, Drax, sat in the middle of Yorkshire as somehow the way to give Yorkshire the future it needs economically, and somehow mythically it would create a good climate for us as well. So what we want to do is take a step back and say, okay, so what do we actually need to do to bring about an absolute zero carbon emission technology in the UK? How do we do that in a way that's fairer for all? And fundamentally what that means is shifting the amount of economic benefit of bringing about and then living in that green future to make sure it benefits people personally. And so what we did was we focused on how many people would need to be employed doing what in Yorkshire and the Humber region to bring about a green future. But there was these two bits of the report which were very much tied together. So what we wanted to do was look at the subsidy levels of Drax gets and say, well, how does that compare to the kind of level of government subsidy that might be needed to kickstart the capital investment to subsidise the jobs until they get to a sustainable level to bring about that change? So, for example, on a bus route, you might need to buy some buses on year one, and then you might need to subsidise the bus routes for the first couple of years until people have decided to make that shift from car transport to public transport. There were wider economic benefits as well, but it was very much about quantifying that alternative, because quite often as campaigners, we're quite good at defining what we're against, but we also wanted to tie that into saying, look, there is a better alternative for Yorkshire here. It's not a question of having Drax or not having Drax. It's a question of having Drax and then blocking the changes that we need to bring about to get a better future, or shifting that focus of government efforts, government subsidy, away from the old technologies that are stopping us getting to a sustainable future, and freeing that up. And it feels at the moment that the owners of Drax, the owners of big airports, the owners of other parts of business as usual in our technology sugarcoat their green stories to sort of sell them to us as if somehow they are the saviours and they are issued by the government with a set of get out of jail free cards because of their precious benefits to the economy and their super amazing benefits to the climate at some point in a mythical future. But what we didn't want to do is repeat what the good work that the Stop Burning Trees Coalition were doing already. And what we worked on was what that looked like. How many units of renewable energy, how many additional miles travelled in a bus, how much more food could be grown locally, and then converted those into jobs numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we found was actually that there was about, I think in total from the direct jobs that we looked at, there was about 73,000 direct green jobs needed in Yorkshire and Humber across the next 10 years to decarbonise. And what we also wanted to do is contextualise this, as Jonathan was saying, within the context of how much money we are wasting on Drax at the moment. So Drax last year in 2025 received £999 million in subsidies from our energy bills. The plans that Drax has or had, because they're sort of pulling back on them now, because one thing Drax will only ever do is they'll only do something if they're going to get government money to do it. But they'd talked for a long time about adding carbon capture and storage to their plants so they could go from so-called carbon neutral energy to carbon negative energy, which is as ludicrous as it sounds. But that's estimated to cost the public about £40 billion in subsidies if that went ahead. And there's, carbon capture and storage has a very long and expensive history of failure, from carbon capture rates to just costing the public a huge amount of money. And so in this report, we really tried to look at actually proven solutions to decarbonising and ones that would improve people's lives. So we looked at things, and Greenhouse looked at things like home insulation, more local farming, transport that was also cheaper and better for people, amongst many other aspects. And I think that's where it was actually really quite exciting, is if we set out different visions for, say, our energy generation, and we had an energy system powered by renewable energy, where electricity is used for most transport and heating, as well as its current uses, there was tens of thousands of jobs that we could have in that sector if we actually promoted it and worked on it. But again, this is all so much linked to the will to do it. We need these jobs, but we also need our decision makers, our politicians, and our communities to be demanding better from our politicians and from our economic system. It doesn't have to be an economic system that's shaped around handing profit to companies like Drax and their shareholders. It could be an economic system that actually prioritises people having warm homes in the winter, people being able to afford their food and having healthy food, being able to afford to get to work in the day and not spend huge amounts of money on transport or their cars. And so I think it's so important to see the potential of those jobs that are very much needed in the north. And we have a new prime minister coming in who seems quite keen, supposedly, on reindustrialising the north, which would be great if he does it the right way. But also he needs to be bold in that and not do what is wanted by all the big companies, but do what's needed for the actual people in the north, like warmer homes and better public transport, healthier food, and creating well-paid jobs that don't destroy people's health or destroy the health of our planet.
See, I mean, one thing I'd want to say, just jumping in there, Mary, is, the vision of an energy system for the UK powered entirely by renewable energy, where electricity is used for transport and heating as well as its current uses. Well, that doesn't actually sound that radical. It's not that far away from what you hear politicians talking about. But then when you say, so what's your energy policy? Most politicians then resort to talking about how electricity is generated. They resort to talking about nuclear power, Drax power, whether we power with coal or oil, or we might need some gas now. The tendency is to forget the energy used in the rest of the economy, the energy used for heating buildings, used industrially, used in transport. And what you end up then is a discussion about power stations, which plays into Drax hands, rather than a discussion about energy in its whole sense. So if we want to get to zero carbon, we need to do two things. We need to ramp up the level of renewable energy, and we can do that across the UK locally. Onshore wind is more cost effective than offshore wind. And there's a whole load of other technologies too, solar, biomass, which can blend together to create a security of supply all year round, combined with energy storage. But the challenge is, alongside the ramping up of renewable energy, what we need to do is reduce our overall energy demand. Because otherwise, if you put all of our demand for heat and our demand for transport through the national grid simply won't be big enough. And what we'll be doing is using things like wind power to supplement the burning of fossil fuels and the running of Drax, rather than replace them. So although our report started off focusing on energy and the jobs in onshore renewables in Yorkshire and the Humber, the other side of the challenge, the challenge of reducing energy demand, well, the way we do that is by transforming what it looks like in all the other sectors. So the work in the transport sector, in the building sector, in food and farming, locally, rather than the current situation, which is around half of the UK's net consumption of food is imported from around the world. All of those sectors, if we transform them towards a green future, if we create the appropriate jobs in those sectors, then that is what allows us to then live within our energy footprint, if you like. So on buildings and on renewable energy, we're very much talking about investing now to reduce the energy use in a building and to provide the new renewable energy. So the jobs are very much in the short term. Whereas in the transport sector, the waste sector, no, I should say the circular economy sector, reuse, recycling, waste reduction, repurposing, everything with re in front, even the word retail comes from the French retalier, which was the idea that the high street is where you went to get things retailored. So the history of a high street was all about a circular economy. We want to kind of reclaim that and create those jobs locally. So the transport jobs, the circular economy jobs, the food and farming jobs, they're not jobs that we do now to create a green future. They're about scaling up that green future right from now. So it's about how many bus drivers can we employ? That goes up. How many people will we employ in the reuse recycling world? Because for every person employed in incineration of waste or landfilling of waste, there's tens, if not hundreds of jobs. If you take that same amount of product and then we bring it back into being, we extend its life. Okay. So, and just on the focus on food and farming, what we did, we focused on looking at horticulture and the potential for producing food in urban areas, because that's the area of agriculture that's most jobs intensive, frankly. The effort that requires to produce food, whether it's, in small holdings or whether it's through, an orchard or a horticulture business of some kind, that there are a lot of jobs there. And a lot of that fresh food is currently imported from around the world, often using air travel, which is highly polluting to the climate as well. So what we did, we quantified and located where you could increase the number of people employed in Yorkshire and Humber, particularly in horticulture and urban farming. And I think that would have a real benefit in terms of what people experience in the areas around where they live. If you can see food growing, I think it increases our connections to the land as well.
That sounds really exciting, actually. I mean, I'm learning today about the report and your thinking. I'm trying to consider the man in the street or the woman in the street, and they might think, well, this is a great idea, hopefully, like me. But then you get the question will probably be, well, how are you going to change it? Like, so we have a system, maybe private farmers are doing certain things, individuals have done things a certain way, with or without government support. What incentives or what type of means are you going to use if people said, it's great, let's do it. So you're smiling, Mary, and that's good. How are you going to actually make it happen? How are you going to get the changes in place?
Yeah, I think your question, Phil, is the billion-pound question of how do we make it happen? How do we fund it? I wish there was one single answer to it because that would be snappy and easy. The realistic answer is there are many answers to this. Part of it is we are wasting billions of pounds on subsidising companies like Drax and other polluters with all the tax breaks we give them. We are now currently hurtling towards funneling money into data centres, which is just kind of the last thing that we need in our society. So I think there's a question of taking the money that we're already spending and arguably wasting and repurposing that. I think there's also, for people who hear about this and think about this, there's a lot of us, for things like growing food locally, that kind of thing, local decision makers, local communities have a lot of power that they can exercise there. Farmers and there is a growing movement of farmers who are sort of changing how they use their land to be more ecologically sustainable or dealing with our ever increasing extreme weather events. So I think, and there's also unions some are looking towards the future of where jobs should be, and they actually have quite a strong power behind them and their workers. And we've seen in different places what worker-led transitions can look like. That can be taking factories that used to make arms weaponry and moving that to manufacturing wind turbines and that kind of thing. So I think there's not just one answer, unfortunately. Maybe Jonathan has got a single answer, that would be great. But I think we need to be taking quite a holistic approach, basically. We need our national government to not be looking at each of these sectors individually, but seeing how each one of them connects together, seeing what we could do with subsidies and public money and all of our taxes that would actually be taking us towards a future that's better, and whether that's funding home insulation schemes. I mean, there's been controversies with previous ones, so making sure the home insulation is done properly and doesn't actually make people's houses worse. But it is possible to do that with the right funding, the right sort of regulation, that kind of thing. We also need to be investing in training and skills, because there are a lot of jobs that we need that we're not prioritizing. We have people that are trained for similar jobs, but they don't have the qualifications to do the jobs we need today, like heat pump installation, all of that kind of thing. So I think there's a very broad range of things, and it's for the people on the street. It's also looking at what job are they in? What could they be pushing towards? What can they be doing in their local community? Whether that's setting up community solar farms or growing food, all of those kinds of things. We have a lot of power in our communities and in ourselves, but we also deserve a government that is actually looking out for us all and putting the money where it should be.
Well, I mean, assuming we live in a world where we had a government that we'll come to that later. I know Jonathan wants to add something, I think. Assuming we had a government that was prepared to fund it, it's like on the ground, are you really thinking, okay, if members of the community wanted to grow food in locally in the way you want, and they came to you and said, will you give me funding to run an organic allotment? You say, yeah, you can do that. Would they get help to do it? And what would happen if, say, you had a great policy of changing the way we grow food, and people didn't come to want it, like there wasn't enough people who wanted to do it. There was an inertia in the system. So are you suggesting really there's a latent desire in communities that you're trying to unleash, that people are going to want to do it the way you suggest it? All you've got to do is give the incentives, subsidies, training, support. Are you optimistic about that, really?
So I don't think they should be coming to me to do that, because that's not what my organisation does. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of community food groups that are working on these kind of things, urban agriculture. And from what I see, from what they're saying, there are people that want to be doing this, but don't necessarily have the access to the land and that kind of things to do it. And I think this is also my position, is a lot of this should be led by the people that are very much working on this. We can sit here and say these are the jobs that could exist, need to exist, but there are community groups that are already growing food in urban spaces, that are running mental health support, where people are getting more connected with the land, and we've seen all the benefits for that. So I think, again, it's a thing of needing a variety of approaches to support that. And I'm sure there will be some people that don't want to grow their food, but I think there's also a lot of people that do. And if they had the access and support and the education and knowledge and everything to do that, I think we could see a very different world.
That's a great answer. I'm going to pass to Jonathan now, because I know he wants to say something on this issue.
Yeah, well, certainly. So one thing I would say is what we try to do in our research is not claim jobs that already exist. So where community groups are trying to do something and getting out, and there are charities existing doing X, Y, and Z, there's many of those already. We wanted to make sure we acknowledged that and didn't double count, because they're already there and they're doing that. And likewise, there's quite a lot of renewable energy already being generated, and there's quite a lot of homes already improved, and there are areas where buses have been extended or improved in recent years. So that was our starting point. So we wanted to look at the gap between how far we've got and how far we've got to go, and acknowledge that bridging that gap requires government to enable those organisations to be supported enough for many others to take on the challenge that some have. So, there's always going to be people who are front runners and leaders and set up something before its time. But what we wanted government to do is step in and support every single community to have all of those different kinds of community initiatives. But it's also going to be led by the public sector. Just taking one example, food. There's a Fix Our Food research was conducted in conjunction with the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. And what they were saying is, what if the public sector purchases fresh food, like schools and, colleges, universities, if they all committed to buy their fruit and vegetables that were then grown in Yorkshire? What that would do is create demand. And on the back of that demand, you could then say, right, I've got this supply waiting for you. You can then start up as a community group, as a community allotment, as a private enterprise growing food in a different way, in a new horticulture project, on the guarantee that there's going to be a market for your food. So we need to make sure we get the supply and the demand connected, and use the public sector purchasing power, but also the leverage of government to actually rise up the community sector to change things. Other areas, public transport. All of this research, we talked about it as creating a new foundational economy. This is not about what the private sector, the entrepreneurs are going to look like in terms of the industrial strategy. This is more about what investment we need to have in jobs to get the basics right, so everyone can live a good life, a good quality of living that's zero carbon. So public transport, creating that public transport infrastructure isn't something that a community group can do. Government needs to take the lead on that. They need to set out what the aspiration is for new bus routes, and then either commission those as publicly run or voluntary sector run or private sector commission, but it needs to be led by the public sector. The circular economy, that's different again. So currently you have a waste system that's dominated by 3 or 4 very large companies, and they work quite closely with government to make sure that the waste sector suits them, maximises their profit, maximises their turnover. If you had a circular economy and you had a lot more reuse, a lot more repurposing, if we shifted it from a presumption that when a planning application comes along, a building will be demolished before a new building went up, and we actually were able to reuse what's there already, then rather than wasting all those materials, we could spend the money making the existing buildings better. But that would change which kind of organisations get to benefit. So one of the challenges this report, beyond the job shifting from Drax to lots of different community, public sector and entrepreneurial startups across Yorkshire, and that being a lot more locally based, it's also they'd be different organisations. So shifting to a sustainable organisation means people will leave one employment and then will either start up with a company that already exists or something starting from new. So what we wanted to do is to make sure that this whole system was supported by what's called a jobs guarantee. and proper support for skills and training. So what we want to do is not sort of, in theory, all these people lose their jobs and over here another load of people get employment, but it's probably those same people that need to shift across. So in other areas, pilots have become train drivers in Switzerland, or someone working in the oil and gas sector might retrain to install solar panels on roofs, as the electrician skills are the same, sort of common to many threads of life. So I think that's the challenge is to make sure we show that there are pathways for people to benefit individually as well.
All you said is inspirational. I'm glad I've learned a bit about it. I mean, you mentioned a job guarantee or a jobs guarantee that our organisation, MMT UK, we've just written our lead, the CEO really, Patricia Pino has just written a jobs guarantee proposal, which hopefully will make some impact at governmental level. And going back to the view of the world in which your policy sits, many people have an idea that the monetary system springs from private action. It's a popular myth. If you pick up a GCSE economics book, I'm not suggesting you do that, I'll put you to sleep. Where did money come from? Well, many, many years ago, we don't know when, people were swapping sandals for fish and apples, and then they invented money. Has such a situation ever existed? Has any anthropologist ever found a single society based on barter which turned into money? Ever, anywhere in the world, in history? The answer, of course, is no. All right, so it's a myth. And even the people that wrote that myth knew it was a myth, but it's sort of metamorphosized into a story and any young students out there who are about to study for their GCSE economics, and if it says in the book money comes from barter, you better write that down for now, although, it's an error in the textbook, and hold that in your head. Money actually comes from, throughout history, always originates with a state or a central authority. Money is introduced from the outset, in every case, by central authority, and usually when there is inequality. So tribal societies don't have money. Who needs money? Well, essentially, take an example. You might get a Babylonian or an Egyptian society where you have a class, a pharaonic class or a superior semi-divine class, and they need to get tribute, and they are given, the tribute is brought to them by virtue of who they are. The emperor, semi-divine. So you need scribes, and they have to work out how much and make a complete record of what's given. So you have a monetary unit, a shekel or a dirham or whatever you want to measure. And it's an abstract unit. It starts as a weight unit, like a pound, so that they can work out everyone's paying their tribute. And that unit of account, that unit of measurement, which is like a foot or a meter, is an abstract unit. It might have originated from, the length of someone's nose or something like that, but it becomes an abstract unit. Now, what we have fast forwarding, and if you're interested in this, so I'll publish in the show notes. If you're interested in this origin of the money thing, when you think, well, it's interesting in history, but what's got to do with us? Well, it means, of course, the government issues money first in the unit of account. But then you think, yeah, well, if the government spends money, who wants it? Particularly if you have a tribal society, why would they need money? And a good example of it, if you're looking back in time, is to look when the pioneers went to Africa, the Bantu. So the pioneers, let's be generous, not say them terrible colonials who were destroying the indigenous populations. Let's be generous for the moment. I'm not making apologies for their behaviour. They needed people to work on their land. So that originally they said, we will pay you British money to come and work on the land. Nobody turned up. Why? Because the Bantu didn't want British money. What good is it? They're a tribal society. They don't need money. So what they did then, they played a trick. They put a hut tax on. They said, right, if you haven't got some British money, we're going to burn your hut down. Now, what does that do? It creates a demand for the currency. So the Bantu then worked for the British. Well, as soon as they've got enough to pay the tax, they went home. The British thought they were lazy. The Bantu thought the British were bullies, which is probably the correct analysis. So what they had to do is then destroy the Bantu's normal way of life. So all they could do then is work for tax and work longer to buy things that were for sale in the money. Now, if we look at the British government, currently it works like that. First of all, it levies a tax. That means that people have to work for the government to get the money to pay the tax. And also they want more than they get to pay the tax. They want money to spend things. We don't just want to earn what we owe in tax. We want to buy things from everybody else. So once we understand the way the government spends, and I'm not saying it's a change, it always does it. Parliament always authorises spending. And that's done by crediting accounts, not printing money, all right, which is a phrase used by monetarists to pretend that we're living in the Weimar Republic. And even then, their explanation was wrong, which an article I'll also put on the show notes. So the government spends on what it wants to spend on. Ideally, the correct things are spent, which Jonathan and Mary will know the right way the government should be spending, not the wrong way. And when that spending goes in, well, obviously, if the government keeps on spending and competing with the private sector for scarce resources, then we'll get inflation and the breakdown of the system. So what the government needs to do is to live up to its means. Taxes are to withdraw our spending power so the government can spend upon what it needs to provision society. And by that I mean healthcare, roads, organic farming, for example, renewable energy. So the question then is, democracy, we decide how big the government sector should be. So there are the right-wingers. They might have a small government. Not for me. I'd like a biggish government. So I would say we need a large government sector. A lot of resources should be owned and controlled by the government, and they should be closely watched. So they are not wasting money, without going into the details. We're all familiar that perhaps some politicians of recent years have been known to waste money, shall we say. We won't go into any details there. So they need to be perfectly well. What are they spending the money on? How much is it costing? Who's profiting from it? So if the government wanted 40% of our labour to do all the things we need, 60% of the labour would be left for the private sector. But what if they don't want it? Therefore, someone's either unemployed because they're not wanted by the public sector, by definition, because the government's already chosen its size of the state, might change it next year. Private sector doesn't want it. So these people want work. They need the work. The government should provide them with a job guarantee. And a job guarantee programme means everyone ready, willing and able to work should be allowed to contribute. These will be nationally funded, locally administered, in the types of projects you're talking about. It's flexible. If it's absolutely necessary, it would be publicly funded. We're not talking about nurses or something like that. And this pool would shrink in good times and expand. It's a buffer stock of employed labour. There's no hysteresis in the system. For economists, that means people out of work, they lose their drive, their self-esteem. So everyone ready, willing and able to work always has an option of a green, inverted commas, job. There are people, of course, who are unwilling, unable to work, mental health, physical health problems, or looking after children, all these sorts of things. That's a separate issue. That's a social question. And our duty as a society is, of course, to care for them, to allow them to lead a dignified life, at least. Well, that's, again, it's a political question. So looking at reports like this report really is superb and tells us, in my opinion, how we can use our funding structures we have now better. We don't have to do anything different with the funding structures. If we use our money better, we can improve life in Yorkshire. What I would say, as a modern monetary theorist, is, well, okay, yeah, I absolutely support it. Great work from Jonathan and Mary and their colleagues. It's been inspiring. But if we're looking beyond and into the future, we need to challenge the narrative. We need to challenge the idea that the government gets money from tax, and if it spends more on weapons, it doesn't have enough left to spend on welfare. This is not true. The government can always buy what is available at market prices in its own currency. So it could have both weapons and welfare, provided the resources were there to provide both. Now, it's a moral question. You might say, yeah, but I don't want weapons. Fine. And there are some right-wingers who don't want welfare. Well, it's not an affordability question. It's always an ethical question. And this is the key thing. The government has the ability to buy the things we need. The budgets are all, if you like, synthetic. The pressure upon us as a society is to decide how big the state should be, how many resources should command, and how are we going to care for those people who are unable to get fruitful work in either the public or private sector. They need a job guarantee. And alongside that, and again, I'm not an expert, if we are going to move to net zero or we need to think about not whether the government's got the money. The government's got as much money it wants. Has it got the resources? Has it got the workers to do it? If not, it'll have to train them. Have we got the technology to do it? Have we got people informed at political level? All these are tasks that need to be done. Now, I've said my piece now, and I'm going to, I'm going to hand back to Jonathan, and I'm hoping that you as listeners will see that I'm trying to provide a complementary insight to my guests. Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that last bit that you mentioned, Phil, which was about skills and jobs. It may not be that the biggest challenge is money, but actually making sure we've got the people lined up to be able to do the work that needs to be done. And that's why in the end of this report, we talk about the need to really focus on skills and training. That's both to make sure we've got the skills and training to allow all the different sorts of work to be undertaken, but also skills and training to allow everyone who wants to work to be able to participate in the workforce. So at the moment, if you have learning disabilities or if you have physical disabilities, often we have a benefit-seeking economy, not for the fault of those individuals, but because we are not providing the right opportunities for those people to be supported into work and then be valued as a member of society. That was an important part of our work. And we're also really highlighting in this report really how the economy isn't working. The economy currently think it's great. The government thinks it's almost great to give £1 billion or close to it to a climate wrecking organisation, Drax. Whereas what we should be doing is investing those kinds of sums of money to create the skills across the economy so we, society, can be engaged and active in the act of bringing about a zero carbon future rather than almost relying on people in faraway, powerful places to do it for us. And the other way the economy isn't working is there are lots of vacancies in different parts of the economy. We need to have an economy where we are cared for and we care for each other. And care is an undervalued part of our economy. That's why we had a particular focus towards the end of our report on care. And we didn't have to look very hard to quantify the amount of work needed to be done in those sectors. All we did was we looked at the current level of vacancies in the NHS, in adult social care and children's social workers. In Yorkshire and Humber alone, that was 20,000 people. So if the economy was to employ people to do all that needs to be cared for people and for the planet, and we were to redirect money to deliver that, then the sort of story we're talking about that's possible for Yorkshire here should be one for the UK. And I know I just pitched to Andy Burnham, if you're listening now, you made a big play about us needing to rebalance the economy between the north and the south. And then I think you pretty much defined the north as anywhere at least a few miles away from London in any direction, that we need to rebalance the economy. And sometimes it feels that we rely on the private sector, as Phil has said, to do that rebalancing for us. And we just have to sort of give them what they need to do it for us, or corporates, or we just rely on house building to get the economy going. But what if we didn't focus on house building? What if we didn't rely on the City of London? What if we actively went out to incentivise the creation of the type of jobs that showed that we cared for each other and the type of jobs we need to get around a green future? Well, if we created that kind of employment in Yorkshire, the great thing about that is that would mean that rather than Drax as a corporate entity sucking money out of the economy, what we'd be doing is making sure that that £1 billion, if it was the same amount of money spent, would be going into people's pockets who live and work in Yorkshire, so they can then spend that money into the local economy. And they would then be able to afford to have a better standard of living, and that would start to generate the kind of society and balanced economy across the UK. And I think for me, that's a really positive story. It's all very well, people leaving their roles as mayor and going down to London, to Westminster. But what if one of the outcomes of the change of Prime Minister was to actually invest in creating the jobs we need across the UK, in the parts of the UK where we haven't seen that local investment? Not investment in infrastructure, not building roads, not building power stations, but investing in employment and employing people to bring about the change we want.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I might just add, and I'll go over to conclude with Mary. It's basically, if you don't want to do something, the easiest thing to say to someone is, I'd like to, but can't afford it. Now, once you understand how the system actually works, which MMT does, all right, so if you're interested in MMT, how it explains the system correctly, accurately, its predictions are far superior to the mainstream economists. Part of the reason they won't face modern monetary theorists in debate is because mainstream economists don't study the reality. They build abstract models. I won't talk too much about that. If you want to understand how the system works and how economics is not fit for purpose, I would suggest you follow MMT podcast. That's fine. But in this thing, the government is always limited by real resources. And as Jonathan said, if you want a better health service, if we've got unemployed nurses who are available at the current wage rate, the government can employ them. What is lost? Nothing, because they won't do anything. The opportunity cost is zero. If we're short of nurses, we have to train them. It's real resources. The government's budget outcome is no relevance for the reason that when the government spends, it credits our bank accounts. It's our savings. When it takes it back in tax, we lose it. So the national debt is not the private sector's debt. It's the private sector's savings. Obviously, they've got it the wrong way around. If I was the government, I spent £1 million in a year and I taxed back 800,000. Who's got the other 200,000? The private sector, that's their savings. And if you add up all the government spending since the late 18th century, they haven't taxed back. It's the national debt. It's our savings. It's not a liability to the taxpayer, inverted commas. It's an asset. It's basic accounting. All this stuff might be slightly confusing your mind, but if you want to have a look at MMT, it's great. We do the big stuff. But on the actual stuff in your face now, you might say, yeah, MMT, great, I get it. But what about now? What about making lives better now within the government structure? And I'm going to hand over to Mary just to give us a little inspirational end there about her report, how she's worked with Jonathan.
Thank you. And I think what you both, Phil and Jonathan, have said really cuts to the heart of this issue is we have a choice as a country. We have a choice where we spend our money. Currently, our energy bills are being used to line the pockets of Drax's shareholders and other mass corporations. Our energy bills that most of us can't afford, that are going up every year. And yet the polluters, the fossil fuel companies like Drax, their profits are rising. That is a political choice. It doesn't have to be that way. All of these things are political choices. Andy Burnham, our new government, they could look at this and say, what actually matters right now? We have a crumbling NHS. We have people who can't afford to heat their leaky homes. We have people that can barely afford their supermarket shop when everything's imported. But we also have farmers struggling to pay their bills. So we have a choice right now with the money that we already have in our economic system, with the nearly £1 billion that we gave to Drax last year. Just think of what we could do with that if we invested that in insulating our homes, in installing solar panels so that we're not so dependent on fossil fuel price fluctuations from all of these wars that are happening, that our governments are waging around the world. And so I think at the moment, and for a long time, our government has been making the decision to funnel money into the private sector and to line the pockets of shareholders. We saw with Drax where the subsidies that they're getting are pretty much equal to the dividends they're paying out to their shareholders. And it's very on the nose of what we're doing. We are choosing to fund a company that is extracting resources from around the world in the form of trees, also known for their carbon capture abilities, that they're turning those trees into wood pellets that are poisoning predominantly poor rural black communities in the southern US, leaving them unable to breathe, while we say on our spreadsheets, our carbon accounting spreadsheets, that this is better and we're carbon neutral, it's carbon neutral energy and it's all better. This is a lie, but it's a political choice and it doesn't have to be that way. And that is the same with our economy and where we focus our jobs. And I think right now we have a huge opportunity in front of us, because we could be investing, and there's starting to be more investment in home insulation schemes that are done properly, in rolling out community energy that people can actually afford, in supporting farmers in their day-to-day business right now with the subsidies that we already give to agriculture and that kind of thing, to make sure that people can afford the things that they need. And so I think we all have that ability. Our government has that ability. Our local authorities have that ability. What they need is their feet held to the fire to show that this is what the public wants and this is what we're going to demand, and we're not going to rest until we get the change that we actually need. And I think it's so possible. We've just got to do it fundamentally.
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Mary. That I'm inspired by that, and I'd like you to take over as Prime Minister instead of Andy Burnham. We may have a little difficulties. If anything that Mary has said or Jonathan said has inspired you, you want to get in touch with them at Don't Burn Trees or Greenhouse. The links will be there in the show notes. If I haven't blown your mind too much with the MMT stuff and you think, yeah, that sounds interesting, I'll have my contact details there. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you a sense of like something to fire you up for the future. And it's a great report. I recommend it. And thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Yeah. Thanks.
Goodbye, Mary. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Phil and Jonathan. And yeah, get involved.
Yeah. Jonathan, you have a final word for our listeners?
Simply, if we replicate the good stuff that's happening in some places and do that everywhere, and we back what's already working, then, we can do this. But it requires us to stop putting our faith in corporate mythology and start putting our faith in people instead.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's great. Thanks again, Mary. So I'll wish you all goodbye and have a good day.